DreamWorks has been quietly creating some of the most complex villains in animated history for over 2 decades while everyone was looking the other way. Most people still hand that crown to Disney, Maleficent, Scar, Jafar, names burned into our cultural memory. But here's what those people are missing. Disney villains are designed to be hated. DreamWorks villains are designed to be understood. And that one difference has changed animated storytelling in ways most audiences never stop to notice. This is about a systematic approach to character writing that makes DreamWorks villains psychologically deeper, more relevant, and ultimately more powerful than anything Disney has put on screen. And by the end of this video, you will never watch an animated villain the same way again. When Shrek hit theaters in 2001, Lord Farquaad wasn't just another evil ruler trying to take over a kingdom. He was a short man in a world that valued height, using authoritarian control to compensate for his physical insecurities. That level of psychological depth was revolutionary for animated villains at the time. Disney's contemporary villains were still largely motivated by generic desires for power or revenge. But Farquaad was different. Ruling from his towering castle in Duloc, obsessed with propaganda posters of his own face, he represented something audiences could recognize from the real world. Political authoritarianism, toxic masculinity, the way insecurity breeds cruelty. Children saw a funny short villain. This is why DreamWorks villains matter. They don't exist in a vacuum of good versus evil. They exist in a world that reflects our own, with all its complexity and moral ambiguity. The genius of DreamWorks villain design starts with one core principle. Every villain believes they're the hero of their own story. This isn't just a writing exercise. It's a fundamental shift in how animated antagonists are conceived and developed. Take Tai Lung from Kung Fu Panda. Returning to the Jade Palace courtyard amidst the falling peach blossoms of his childhood training ground, Tai Lung genuinely believed he deserved to be the Dragon Warrior. He spent his entire life preparing for that moment. Master Shifu raised him, trained him, filled his head with destiny and greatness. Then Oogway looked into Tai Lung's heart and saw darkness. But here's what makes this brilliant. Tai Lung's anger isn't irrational. From his perspective, he was promised something his entire life, worked harder than anyone else, and then was denied based on a subjective judgment about his character. The tragedy isn't that he became evil. The tragedy is that he was set up to fail by a system that raised him to believe worthiness could be earned through strength alone. This psychological complexity extends to Lord Shen in Kung Fu Panda 2. Standing in the ruins of Gongmen City, surrounded by his metal war machines and cannon foundries, Shen represents something even more tragic. He was told by a prophecy that a warrior of black and white would defeat him. Instead of accepting this fate, he decided to commit genocide against all pandas to prevent it. The irony is devastating. Shen's attempt to avoid his destiny is exactly what creates it. If he had never killed Po's family, Po would never have ended up at the noodle shop, never would have stumbled into becoming the Dragon Warrior, never would have been in position to stop him. Shen literally creates his own downfall through his attempts to avoid it. This isn't just good storytelling. This is sophisticated commentary on how fear and trauma can drive people to become the very thing they're trying to prevent. Shen's backstory, revealed through shadow puppet sequences that mirror his own childhood memories, shows us a peacock who was loved by his parents but corrupted by his own fear of death and irrelevance. The visual storytelling in these backstory sequences does something Disney rarely attempted at the time. Instead of making the villains' past excuse their actions, it makes their actions more tragic because we understand exactly how they could have been different. But the most psychologically complex DreamWorks villain might be Ramses from The Prince of Egypt. Standing in the golden halls of his palace, wearing the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, Ramses represents the ultimate conflict between personal relationships and systemic oppression. This is Moses' brother. They grew up together in the same palace, playing the same games, sharing the same privileges. The chariot race through the streets of Memphis, the pranks they pulled on the priests, the genuine affection they had for each other. All of that was real. But Ramses was also raised to be pharaoh, to believe that his divine right to rule was more important than any personal relationship. When Moses returns demanding the release of the Hebrew slaves, Ramses faces an impossible choice. Accept that everything his culture taught him about Egyptian superiority is wrong, or maintain the system that gives his life meaning. Moses is right that slavery is morally wrong and that his people deserve freedom. But Ramses is also right that releasing the slaves would destabilize the entire Egyptian economy and potentially cause chaos that could kill thousands. This moral complexity is what separates DreamWorks villains from Disney villains. Jafar wants power because he wants power. Ramses maintains power because releasing it might cause even more suffering. The difference is that one motivation is selfish and simple, while the other is systemic and complex. Even when DreamWorks creates seemingly straightforward villains, they layer in social commentary that gives them relevance beyond the immediate story. Captain Chantal Dubois from Madagascar 3 appears to be a simple antagonist, a French animal control officer chasing the escaped zoo animals across Europe. But look deeper at her character design and motivation. Dubois is obsessed with hunting and capturing animals, not for any noble purpose of animal control, but for the thrill of the chase and the trophy. She represents the colonial mindset that treats the natural world as something to be conquered and displayed. Her pursuit of the animals across the Monte Carlo casino, through the streets of Rome, and finally to the circus in New York represents a kind of cultural imperialism. The visual language supports this reading. Dubois is always shown in positions of authority, using the power of institutions to pursue her personal obsessions. The animal control trucks, the Monaco police, the various European law enforcement agencies she manipulates all become extensions of her will to dominate nature. This isn't subtle, it's not meant to be. DreamWorks villains often function as social commentary, representing real-world attitudes and systems that the heroes must overcome not just physically, but ideologically. The fairy godmother from Shrek 2 is perhaps the most brilliant example of this social commentary approach. Operating her massive potion factory, churning out magical assembly lines and corporate branding, she represents the commercialization of happiness and the toxic aspects of traditional fairy tale culture. She doesn't just want Fiona to marry Prince Charming because she's evil, she wants it because she's built an entire business empire around the idea that happiness comes from conforming to traditional beauty standards and social expectations. Her potion factory isn't just magical, it's industrial. She's turned fairy tale magic into a commodity. The happily ever after potion isn't just a plot device. It's a metaphor for every beauty product, every self-help book, every piece of marketing that tells people they need to change themselves to be worthy of love. When Fiona drinks the potion and transforms into a conventionally beautiful human, she's buying into the same toxic messaging that the fairy godmother has been selling for decades. This is why the climax of Shrek 2, set in the grand ballroom of Far, Far Away Castle, is so satisfying. When Fiona chooses to remain an ogre, she's not just choosing Shrek over Prince Charming. She's rejecting an entire system of values that equates worth with appearance and conformity with happiness. The visual design of DreamWorks villains supports these deeper themes in ways that are both striking and meaningful. Unlike Disney villains, who often rely on sharp angles and dark colors to signal their evil nature, DreamWorks villains are designed to be visually appealing while remaining threatening. Lord Farquaad's design is actually quite handsome in a conventional sense. His armor is immaculate, his posture perfect, his castle pristine. Instead, Farquaad looks like exactly what he is, an authoritarian leader who maintains power through image control and systematic oppression. This design philosophy extends to almost every major DreamWorks villain. Tai Lung is beautiful in his movements, a perfect physical specimen corrupted by pride and entitlement. Lord Shen is elegant and regal, his white peacock feathers creating a striking silhouette against the red flames of Gongmen City. Even Pitch Black from Rise of the Guardians is designed with an otherworldly elegance that makes him more seductive than repulsive. The voice acting choices reinforce this complexity. DreamWorks consistently casts actors who can bring depth and nuance to villainous roles, rather than simply making them sound evil. Gary Oldman's Lord Shen is refined and philosophical, even as he commits genocide. Ian McShane's Tai Lung is wounded and desperate beneath his fury. Ralph Fiennes brings genuine pain to Ramses, making his stubbornness feel like tragedy rather than simple villainy. These vocal performances do something crucial. They make the villains sound like real people rather than cartoon antagonists. When Shen talks about his destiny in the harbor of Gongmen City, surrounded by his burning fleet, he doesn't sound like a maniacal villain explaining his evil plan. He sounds like a person trying to justify choices he knows are monstrous. The musical scores accompanying these villains follow the same principle. Hans Zimmer's work on The Prince of Egypt gives Ramses themes that are majestic and tragic, rather than simply threatening. The music tells us that Ramses is a great leader making terrible choices, not an evil person doing evil things. This attention to audiovisual detail creates villains who feel fully realized rather than functional. They exist as complete characters with their own aesthetic and emotional reality, not just as obstacles for the heroes to overcome. But perhaps the most important aspect of DreamWorks villains is how they function within the hero's journey structure. They're not just external obstacles, they're internal challenges made manifest. They force heroes to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and grow beyond their original limitations. Shrek's conflict with Lord Farquaad isn't really about saving Fiona from the dragon's tower. It's about whether Shrek will continue to isolate himself in his swamp or learn to connect with others despite his fear of rejection. Farquaad represents everything Shrek hates about society: superficiality, prejudice, the tendency to judge others based on appearance. But here's the complexity. Shrek is also guilty of these same tendencies. He judges people before getting to know them, assumes the worst about their motivations, and uses his fearsome reputation to avoid vulnerability. Farquaad is essentially Shrek's shadow self, showing what he could become if he chose bitterness and isolation over connection and growth. This pattern repeats throughout DreamWorks films. Poe's conflict with Tai Lung in Kung Fu Panda isn't just about protecting the Valley of Peace. It's about whether Po will learn to believe in himself despite not fitting traditional expectations of what a warrior should be. Tai Lung represents Po's fear that he really isn't worthy of being the dragon warrior, that everyone who doubts him might be right. Moses' conflict with Ramses in The Prince of Egypt goes even deeper. They're not just on opposite sides of a political conflict. They represent different responses to privilege and power. Moses chooses to give up his position of comfort to fight for justice. Ramses chooses to maintain his privilege even when it requires him to commit atrocities. The staff of Moses transforming into a serpent in Pharaoh's court isn't just a demonstration of divine power. It's a symbolic representation of the choice both men face. This is why DreamWorks villains feel more impactful than many Disney villains. They're not just external threats to overcome. They're internal conflicts the heroes must resolve to complete their character development. Defeating the villain isn't enough. The hero must also overcome the part of themselves that the villain represents. The social relevance of DreamWorks villains extends beyond individual character development to broader cultural commentary. These films were released during specific historical moments, and their villains often reflect contemporary anxieties and social issues. Lord Farquaad premiered in 2001, arriving at the height of cultural anxieties about aggressive corporate gentrification and the relentless Disneyfication of public spaces. His authoritarian control of Duloc, complete with sanitized propaganda and systematic persecution of diverse fairy tale creatures, resonated with audiences who were watching authentic local cultures being erased by massive corporations demanding absolute profitable conformity. The Fairy Godmother arrived in 2004, at the height of America's obsession with reality television and cosmetic surgery. Her commercialization of happiness and beauty reflected growing concerns about how media and advertising were shaping unrealistic expectations about appearance and success. Tai Lung and Lord Shen emerged during the Great Recession, representing different aspects of how economic and social instability can corrupt people. Tai Lung embodies the rage of someone who followed all the rules and still didn't get what they were promised. Shen represents the fear that drives people to make increasingly desperate and destructive choices. Even Captain Dubois reflects contemporary concerns about institutional power and environmental destruction. Her relentless pursuit of the Madagascar animals mirrors real-world debates about conservation, animal rights, and the use of government resources to serve private interests. This social relevance is part of what makes DreamWorks villains feel timeless, rather than dated. They're not just products of their specific moment in animation history. They're responses to ongoing human concerns about power, identity, justice, and belonging. The influence of DreamWorks villain design can be seen throughout contemporary animation. Pixar's later films began incorporating more psychologically complex antagonists. Disney's recent villains have become more nuanced and sympathetic. Even Marvel and DC animated projects have moved away from purely evil villains toward antagonists with understandable motivations. This shift represents a fundamental change in how we tell stories to children. Instead of presenting a world of clear moral absolutes, modern animation acknowledges that good people can make bad choices, that systems can be corrupt even when individuals within them mean well, and that understanding someone's motivations doesn't excuse their actions but can help us prevent similar tragedies. The legacy of DreamWorks villains isn't just in animation. It's in how we think about conflict, empathy, and moral complexity. They've taught a generation of viewers to look for the human story behind antagonistic behavior, to question systems of power, and to understand that the line between hero and villain often depends on the choices we make, rather than the circumstances we're born into. When you watch a DreamWorks film today, you're not just seeing entertainment. You're seeing a sophisticated approach to character development that treats its audience with respect and intelligence. These villains don't exist to be defeated. They exist to be understood. And in understanding them, we better understand ourselves. This is what makes DreamWorks villains truly iconic. They're not just memorable characters from childhood movies. They're complex explorations of human nature that happen to be wrapped in accessible, entertaining animated stories. They've elevated the entire medium by proving that animated films can tackle serious themes without losing their sense of wonder and fun. Remember that you're not just watching good versus evil. You're watching a masterclass in character development that has fundamentally changed how animated stories are told. That's the true genius of DreamWorks villains. They've proven that the most powerful stories aren't about defeating monsters. They're about understanding them. And in that understanding, finding the strength to become better ourselves.